So I will be reviewing the first part of the Forever War, which is titled Private Mandela. And really, what I like about it is that it doesn't dive into exploring how alienation is created, which, I mean, of course, makes total sense. This is a war novel, right? This is a war novel. So it doesn't make sense if you go in and just start telling you the consequences of war without building up a picture of what war is like. And I think Joe Haldeman does a great job, not only because he's a Vietnam War vet, but because I think he captures the emotions of war very well, or at least how I think war might be. Obviously, I'm a kid, so I haven't been there. He does it in a lot of ways. First of all, he shows you the horror of what's actually occurring, and the way, but not in a sense that it's like, scaring the crap out of you, and you're like, oh my god, war is, oh no, I'm pooping my pants. It's not that. He shows you, he presents what is literally happening in front of your eyes. You see friends, close, people who you're close to, people who you have actually slept with and have a close, intimate connection with, just die. But they die suddenly and without warning. They die horrific deaths with gruesome ways of just dying. There was this guy whose head was melted off by a gigantic bubble. It sounds ludicrous. It's not mocking these deaths as much as showing how sudden it is and how little your surrounding cares about you specifically. So the way you die can be very unexpected. The way you can die is very uncalled for and stupid. Like, if you make a mistake in war, if you accidentally poke your head out of a hole, then you're dead. So it doesn't matter how small of a mistake you made. In war, people die. And Joe Haldeman captured that perfectly. Another aspect that he does really well is that he shows you how little you end up caring for them. Because these people who die, they only have a split-second mention before they actually do. Probably at the beginning of the chapter, or maybe a few chapters before. So they're not meant to be side characters as much as they are side pieces. And I think that really does a very good justice of what it's like. Because it's war, right? Again. And it's that nobody cares about these individual lives. As long as they get the mission done, you get the mission done. Mandela, this is not a spoiler, but Mandela survives through the entirety of the Forever War just because he's lucky. He's not special, he doesn't have any superpowers, he's not particularly the smartest, the best, or the most wise guy. He's a pacifist, right? He's kind of like a mild coward. He doesn't really want to fight the Tories, not a lot. But yeah, it's through complete luck. So these people who die, you don't really care for them. And that mimics the way actual veterans and actual soldiers who are fighting for people, who are fighting for their countries, actually are treated. Because they're just another tool to be used to kill the enemy. Yeah. And so, that aside, except for portraying how things are like in war, it also does a really good job of piecing out the rest of the novel. Because I really love this book, because it's not fast-paced, it's not slow-paced, it's just the normal amount. And it throws you right into the war. And then the rest of the book is about how that is going to affect these characters, and kind of what do they do in response to that. And once they've done that second action, what comes as a consequence of that one, and so on and so forth. So it's a very unusual way of a hero's journey. Because you start off as, like, he doesn't start off entirely as a naive kid. Mandela is never portrayed as being naive. He just doesn't know what's going on, but he doesn't have any particular hopes or expectations of the war. He has hopes and dreams as a person, but he doesn't have them as a war. He's not cynical, he's not whiny, he just does his job, but he doesn't like it. And he is smart enough to realize what the war is doing to him and his people. So yeah, it's not like a Frodo comes out of the Shire, or Bilbo just going with the wizard and just whining about not getting enough food for each day. No. So it really starts off with a character who isn't entirely naive, but he's at the start of the journey, so he doesn't know a lot. So in that way, it's kind of like a hero's journey. But once a specific action has taken and there's a catalyst that is planted that initiates a change in him, he's changing constantly. It's basically like every single chapter he realizes something new, he gets a bit better, he realizes something new, he gets even better. But then there is this at the end of part 1, there is this massive change that I won't get into because this is specifically about part 1, right? As Private Mandela, and then it's that point where there's this massive change in the status quo, and that's when our character actually, because basically in the first part, Mandela is repeating the first half of the hero's journey. So he knows nothing, he gains something new, he learns something, knows nothing again, learns, has a catalyst, learns something new. And then at the beginning of part 2, we basically get this huge change. And that is basically, you have to learn something again. Him going back to Earth is a catalyst for another type of learning. So it's repeating this hero's journey. I think it's really fun because if you were to adapt this book, it's not going to be this a movie type of thing. It's a lot like a vignette, and so in a lot of ways it models after that postmodern type of story. It's not super direct. There is not a very clear way that the story is moving. It feels a bit dreamy, really, and I think that's a very good idea of writing this book, because not that, it's the central core of the book, but that dreamy feel helps lend to make the war feel like it's kind of endless, that a lot is going on, that these characters are going through so much and they're kind of being overwhelmed, but not super. So it's not like White Sargasso Sea, where it's this core thematic feature of the book that really fleshes out those components, but it does a good job of aiding these other stuff that's coming out. So the vignette style of writing is not particularly super important in this book, but I thought it was a point that is worth mentioning, because there's a lot of vignettes going on, because there are a bunch that involves him training on the ice hydrogen planet when a bunch of trainees die. And then when you're actually landed on the Torrent planet, there was another vignette of what's going on. Again, keep in mind that even though they're actually written as like vignettes, they're not exactly disjointed. This is in no way, shape, or form an anthology. There's like a very clear flow of the plot, essentially. You know what's going to happen plot-wise, but character-wise, that's when it kind of gets a bit jumbled, right? Because this is really more of a character story than it is a plot story, although both sides are done very well, and I think that's why this book is just so beloved in the sci-fi fantasy community. In this case, sci-fi, right? Yeah. The first part portrays the brutality of the war, how little people actually do care for, how little people in society care for these soldiers. And the last part that I want to talk about is how it builds the character of Mandela personally, right? Because the funny thing about this book is that it doesn't really, there's not a very good way of building Mandela's character. You know him, you feel for him, but it's very hard to come up with an adjective for him. He's not like that guy from Taxi Driver. He is not Travis. But you do get a feel for what he is. So obviously, he doesn't want to kill a lot of people, but he has no qualms against defending himself and using his training. So he is not an idealist, but he's just kind of a normal guy who is also kind of lonely, but not depressed type of lonely. Like if you're in a war and you're with a bunch of new people, you'd feel lonely too, right? And there's a very human side of him that's presented in this book, in which he has a thing for Potter. I mean, he sleeps around with everyone. Everybody does, but there is a very a clear chemistry and connection with Potter, Mary Gay Potter. And I think that really does build his character quite well, because you know that there's a motivation for him. Because not only does he want to get out of this war, he also wants to spend more time with Potter. And that part of his character, I think, is built up more in... Actually, I'm not sure if that is at the end of the book, but... Yep, it is going to take... More of that thing is going to be fleshed out in part 2. But yeah, in part one, that is clearly foreshadowed, and his character is built up as a response to that. Yes. And a really fun thing that I really enjoyed out of this book is, as I've talked before, the structure of this novel is very... It's not the first time I've seen something like this. It doesn't have an entirely new spin on it or anything, but its utilization is quite good and noticeable and also notable. And I think that's something that is worth appreciating about this book. Character-wise, we've also talked about that. Plot-wise, it's quite well. You kind of know what's happening. Basically, first part, you go through boot camp, and after boot camp, you have... you're fighting the Torrens. You're fighting the Torrens. You're trying to fight them. Oops, sorry. And, yeah. So, part one does a lot, thematically and plot-wise. Also establishing clear motivations for the characters and how this entire book is going to be tonal-wise. And I'm honestly disappointed at how little this book gets mentioned by anybody outside of... Actually, I haven't heard a lot about it, even in the sci-fi community. I went online and I found it, and I'm honestly surprised, because this book deserves to be talked about in lit class, man. If people like Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, they should probably go for this, because while that book has reached mainstream recognition, this has not, and I'm super sad for it, because it is so good, and it is so good. Also, it's got a lot of sexy time, so yeah, it's pretty fun. It's pretty fun as well. And it's a very short read. It's like 200 pages. And I really love it. So, yeah, for anybody who's watching this, if you have time, please read this book and support Joe Haldeman. He seems like a really good author, and I really enjoyed the hell out of this book. And once I'm finished with this, I will be taking a break. I want to read other stuff first, but I do hope on reading Forever Peace, and then the final one in the Forever War trilogy. And I really hope that Joe Haldeman keeps up that good work and that same spirit with those books. But if they don't, that's fine. I actually spoiled myself with the ending when I was reading this. So it seems like a very good self-contained novel, and I appreciate that so much. I wish Joe Haldeman would publish more stuff in these few years so I can get to, read more of his stuff in his new take. Because it's been 50 years, right? This is in the 70s. This was written in 74. Now it's 21. So close to 50 years later, I want to see what this guy has in store for us as the readers, as people who really appreciate what he's done in this book and what he's achieved. I think he deserves much more attention. Yeah, so thank you. This is the end of my review for part one of The Forever War, Private Mandela. Specifically, it's actually... Private Mandela, 1997 to 2024. Thank you.